What's going on YouTube? My name is Trey Kepsel and this is Elk Motorsports. In today's video, I'm going to be showing y'all how to replace a clutch on a Suzuki Samurai, and I'm going to show you a couple of modifications you can do while you have it out of there. So let's get to it. About right here, the similarities are going to be a little different. My vehicle has a My Turbo kit on it, so the disassembly will be slightly different. If you have a stock setup completely, you'll have an air cleaner, or if you have an aftermarket air cleaner, or if you have a Weber carburetor, you won't need to take the carburetor off to reach the bolts on the starter. If you have a turbo kit, you obviously need to remove some charge piping and the CV carburetor. Alright guys, I got everything out. I'm going to show y'all what's going on. I actually don't need to replace my clutch. I've already done it, but for the sake of instructional purposes, I pulled it out and I'm going to show you guys what your options are. This clutch I got from Petroworks, so it's one side is pucked and the other side is traditional clutch. That way you still retain the original pedal feel, but you actually have more grab for whenever you do upgrades to the engine. I knew that I was going to be doing forced induction, so I went ahead and upgraded the clutch before I got the turbo. All the oil that you can actually see inside this bell housing, I actually have a leaking rear main seal, which I'm not able to fix by replacing the seal. I pulled I did something I wasn't supposed to do. I actually put a oil catch can on and I kept it as a sealed setup. If you look at the setup I have now, I have a breather so it vents the atmosphere. Before, I actually had it coming from the valve cover and I bypassed the original PCV valve, but I added a brass fitting and I had it going in there. I figured, oh, you know, it's gonna have vacuum, it's gonna suck this down. Well, it didn't. It pressurized this system, and if you don't allow the crankcase to vent, that pressure's got to go somewhere, and it finds its way out of the seals. I actually ended up blowing out my rear main seal. It blew it out, sucked it back in, and it got wedged sideways, and it cut a groove into my crankshaft. So now it actually will not seal anymore. I will forever have a little bitty drip, unless I do like a speedy sleeve, which I might do in the future. That'll be something that I'll show you how to do if you have a leaking rear main seal and the crankshaft is gouged. I am not going to pull the whole motor apart just to change a crankshaft. I'll just live with a leak. But you know, we're not all immune to making mistakes. So here's your pressure plate. Here's your clutch. And right here you have your actual transmission mounts. On the right, here is the stock mount. It's a rubber mount. As you can see, it's bent and torn. Has to do with this truck being an accident. Everything doesn't line up exactly the way it needs to, so this bushing has a lot of pull. This is actually brand new. It's probably only got 1,000 miles on it. It's already torn up. This one right here is from Dr. Z's fabrication. It's pretty cool. It uses the same kind of mount that a leaf spring uses. It's really solid, really nice. It'll go along really nice with that transfer case cradle that I got from Zuks Offroad in that upgraded mount. It'll get rid of a lot of play in the driveline. Whenever you do a clutch, you need to pull this off and you need to lubricate this shaft with some axle grease. It's really not hard to take off. So all you have to do is right here on the side is the clutch lever. Pull the clutch lever all the way forward, and then you grab the throwout bearing. It'll fall off that input shaft. But over here on this side, there's a little bitty pin in a slot that prevents the throwout bearing from coming out. If you push this shaft in, see how it moves? You push it in that little bit and you hold the throwout bearing in place, it'll come off. That little tab will come out, and then you can pull the throwout bearing all the way off. Then all you have to do, you know, clean up this old grease, clean it all up. You can put your finger right here and you can move the throwout bearing. You can feel it, make sure it doesn't have any grinding or any skipping in it. You know, just make sure it's nice and fluid. It should feel relatively tight, and that's how you know it's good. I have an older one. I don't think it's actually in bad shape, but whenever I did the clutch, I just changed it anyways. They're so inexpensive and it's kind of peace of mind. Why not, if you're there, put a new part in instead of going through all of this trouble to get it out if this goes bad, you know, where you could just do it right here, right now. Just take some grease and just put it on there. Work it around. And that pretty much takes care of that. You don't have to go super crazy, but you don't want to skimp either. You just don't want to just throw a whole bunch on there. And then you just do this kind of reverse order. Pull the clutch lever out, push it in, put your throwout bearing on. You're gonna have to kind of come at it at an angle. If I can get it on. There we go. You're gonna kind of cockeye this so this arm goes back first to move it on here, and then to get the throwout bearing on the input shaft, it's going to pull this back out. And as you can see, by hand it comes all the way off, but once the pressure plate is on and those fingers are there, it will prevent this from actually falling off the end of that input shaft, so you don't have to worry about that. Just put it on there, you're good to go. Now with your new clutch, you'll get a clutch alignment tool. Now the purpose of this clutch alignment tool is to align the splines inside this clutch to this pilot bearing. And you do that because this input shaft is separate inside of this transmission. So right in here, there's a bearing. So one side of it is supported, and the other side of the shaft will be supported by this pilot bearing. So this clutch will go on the splines, and whenever you mate this transmission in, the end of this input shaft will go into this pilot bearing, and that's what will support it. So this tool is for whenever you're putting this clutch and this pressure plate on the flywheel, you'll put this in here. The end of that alignment tool will go inside the pilot bearing, and it will pretty much just hold everything in place while you bolt this down. This pressure plate, there are dowels on the flywheel to hold it in place, but while you're bolting it on, this clutch can actually move around and it can be misaligned. And if it's misaligned, you're gonna have a really hard time trying to put that transmission on. It's not going to go on. You're just gonna be sitting there wondering what's going on. So you'll see me while I'm tightening it, every once in a while, as I sandwich it down, I'm gonna tighten these bolts down in a star pattern a little bit at a time. I'm not gonna wrench one down than the other, because these fingers will lock, you'll see them fold down. And this pressure plate mating surface will be sandwiching on this clutch. We'll be sandwiching this clutch to the flywheel. So what I'll do is, I'll turn one bolt like 2 or 3 turns, and I'll go 180 degrees, and I'll turn that one 2 or 3 turns, then 180, in a star pattern until I get them all the way down. I also use Loctite on these bolts. They do have lock washers, but those bolts are old. Those lock washers tend to already be flattened out, so I just put Loctite on them, just as a little added insurance. And then when you go to put this all back together, make sure you don't forget this spacer. This spacer is what spaces your transmission and your starter from each other, so the teeth on the starter will engage properly with the teeth on the flywheel. You don't want to forget this, because it'll just chew up teeth on starters. Then you have to take it all back apart. You have to try to get a hold of one of these, put it all back together. It's gonna suck. So you're gonna find 2 dowel pins. One of them goes in this bottom hole, the other one goes in this top hole. I usually put them on the motor first, and then I use that to hold this plate in place. And I will kind of walk y'all through the trick that I use to put this in. When you put this transmission in, which is not overly heavy, you have to tilt it, the tail shaft end up. And you have to go up on the mount, the back portion where the shifter goes in. I have to set it on there, then I have to move my hand around, and I've got to go on it. And then you kind of have to rotate this a little bit. When I did my exhaust and I built my downpipe for my turbo, I purposely built it in a way that I didn't have to remove the exhaust whatsoever. Before, whenever I was naturally aspirated, the catalytic converter had a hanger on it. I guess there's a stock hanger that goes underneath the rear transmission mount, and it was in the way. So when I redid that, I purposely moved it over in such a way that I don't have to remove anything except for that front drive shaft from the transfer case, just because that's the way I roll the transmission, but I'll show you all that. So here is the process for putting the clutch in the truck. You're gonna start by putting your pilot bearing in. I put a little bit of grease on the side just to help it go in and out. That's the reason why I was able to get this one out so easily. If you saw, I was able to use a pick and just able to pull it out. Sometimes you have to use grease. You have to push grease in through this hole and it will push it out. Some people use bread. There is like a slide hammer tool that you can use, but those are like the 2 easiest ways to do it. Now when you put this back in, you're gonna need to use a little hammer, and you're gonna need to just tap it in. Just like that. You'll kind of hit it around so that way it goes in nice and evenly, and it will just pop right in, and it'll bottom out on the back of the crankshaft, and that's good enough. You don't have to worry about having a certain distance in or out. It'll just bottom out on that crankshaft and you'll be good to go. Next, your bolts for your pressure plate. You can see they have a lock washer on them, but as you can see, they're already sandwiched all the way down. You could sit here and try to bend them back or whatever, but what I like to do is I just put a little medium strength Loctite on them. Now, when you put the clutch disc on, there's really only one way it's gonna go on. You'll notice that you have this protruded section of springs. You can't put it on with that end on the flywheel. It doesn't have the space for it. They are gonna be facing the fingers of the pressure plate, just like that. Your pressure plate itself, you have the holes for the screws or the bolts, and you'll have some extra holes that will line up with these dowel pins. So you'll take your clutch, put it inside or in between your pressure plate and your flywheel. You can take your clutch alignment tool and you can put it in there too. You come up here, you won't be able to see it, but I'm looking in between the clutch and the flywheel, and I'm looking at the end of the clutch alignment tool and I'm putting it inside. Then all you have to do is line up some of your holes for your dowel pins, and then you'll just slide it on. And then you'll just kind of take your clutch alignment tool and you want to do like this. You just want to make sure there's a little bit of play, but as long as you can move it in and out, you know that it's pretty freed up. Just run all of your pressure plate bolts in finger tight. Just periodically check your clutch alignment tool. Make sure that it's not bound up. It's just, you know, can go in and out freely. Now that you have all of them in there finger tight, now you can get yourself a ratchet. You don't want to use an impact or nut driver while you're putting these down, just because you want to do it incrementally in a star pattern, so that way these fingers will bite down evenly. You can screw up the pressure plate if you torque too much down on one side. And I'll just do a couple of turns, then go 180 degrees. You know, just go ahead and check it. Every time you tighten up, you can just check that clutch alignment tool just to make sure that that clutch is right where it needs to be. Now, I don't know if you can see it, but the fingers on this side are starting to fold down. These ones are actually elevated a little bit more, and they should close more when I work this one right here. See, look at that. See how it doesn't want to come out that easily? Back off on this one. Tightened up. There we go. That's the other reason why you want to go in a star pattern. If you bite too much on one side, it'll get that clutch and it will kind of cockeye it, and then it won't want to, your clutch alignment tool won't slide in and out so easily. Now once you have them all flat down, pretty much hand tight, you can go, you don't have to go in the star pattern to give them that last little snugging. Now if you want, go ahead and hit them with a nut driver. And that's good to go. That's in there. Now, we're ready to put the spacer for the transmission and the starter up there. Back here, you'll see there is that dowel pin, or it's just a dowel actually. This opening on the transmission is a little bit larger. You won't be able to put it in any more than the 2 spots. Over here it won't fit. One goes down here, and then the other goes up here. So now you'll take your spacer. You'll have to kind of go behind the flywheel to get it to go around. And you'll get this bottom. When you get it around, you'll put it on this dowel pin right here. Then you get this top one on the dowel pin. And that's all that's gonna hold it up for right now. Next, what we gotta do is get the transmission in place. Now I'm gonna show y'all the little trick I use to get it in there. Pick up the transmission. You can kind of rest the bell housing, the inside of the bell housing, on the front differential, on the yoke, and then if you put where my left hand is, I set it up on here. I set it right here where this transmission mount is. That holds it up so that way I can move my hand from here to back in here on the other side of the cross member. And you grab it and you pick it straight up. Now you want to kind of twist the transmission so the bell housing is facing towards the differential, and then you want to roll it. You want to roll it like this towards the passenger side. There we go. Okay, now I'm going to try to show y'all what I'm talking about. See how the bell housing like just barely makes it by that pressure plate? You can get it in here just like that. Once it's turned, I mean, the flywheel are going to hold it up all on its own. So it is tight, but you can do it without. I've literally dropped this transmission so many times. If I'm not filming, I can do it start to finish in 30 minutes. So it's not that hard. It'll take you a little bit longer your first try, but. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna line this bolt or stud, there's one on each side on the bottom. We're gonna line them up with these holes right here on the bottom of, of the back of the engine. The only part that kind of can give you some trouble is this input shaft. If the splines aren't exactly lined up with the clutch, it'll kind of give you a little bit of trouble. You kind of got to force it on there, and this input shaft will spin to line itself up. So what we're going to do is we're going to pick this up, kind of watch the driver's side and the passenger side. See, like right now, it doesn't want to line up. Probably because of that input shaft. And my spacer wants to fall off, which that's going to happen while you're messing with this. This spacer likes to fall off, and it's a big pain. So just kind of reach in here and turn that input shaft a little bit, try to help it line up. And come back up. This is the part where I generally have to get off the creeper, because when I try to push on the transmission, I just get pushed away on the creeper. So it helps if you're on the ground. Oh, my spacer fell off. Just like that. Cutting my exhaust wrap on my downpipe. That's fun. Oh well. No big deal. Transmission will stay up there. Let's get your spacer. This bottom dowel pin always likes to come off on my transmission. I'll get that. Turn that input shaft a little bit more. There we go. Whew. There it is. It always gives me a little bit of trouble. It's like I gotta rock it and rock it and rock it, and then it goes right in. All right. Now what I like to do is get these bottom bolts on the bell housing out. It's a lock washer and a 14mm. Next, we're gonna get the rear transmission mount up. So, with this upgraded transmission mount, there's a couple of companies that make it. Like I said, I got Dr. Z's. I was buying a whole bunch of stuff from him, and he told me about this that he had, and I was like, oh man, I want that. Because mine, like I showed you, it was already torn. Gotta get your own hardware. I got some bolts or some nuts that have a locking plate inside them, and I'm using some, what are these? These are M8 1.25 thread pitch, which is like, you know, the 12mm that's on the Samurai already. Well, I didn't say this on before because I was just kind of going through the motions of taking the transmission out. When you pull the shifter out of the transmission, make sure it's in neutral, and put your transfer case in neutral too, so that way you can spin this drive shaft so you can undo all the bolts. So next we're gonna do the front drive shaft. It's very, very important that you put this drive shaft, if you took it out like I did, in proper phase. Now what that means is that this part of the universal joint, it slips in and out, right? This needs to line up with the other side. They need to be exactly in the same orientation. If they don't, you'll get a lot of vibration, and you get a lot of vibration because they will actually spin at different speeds. There's actually, I need to link it in the description, but there's actually a really cool video on how phasing works, like what exactly it is. And you don't have to worry about, you're not gonna be a little bit off, like one tooth off is actually like dramatic, like you will be able to tell instantly that they are out of phase. It's not gonna be, oh, well, I mean, they look like they're in phase, but I'm not sure. No, it'll be dramatically noticeable that they're out of phase. Now to put this shifter back in there are these side springs that hold this lever portion of the shifter in place. You have to open them up. Reach in there with a screwdriver and you can open them up. Well guys, there you have it. That's how you replace the clutch on a Suzuki Samurai. Be sure to hit a like if this was content that you enjoyed watching, and if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe, and I'll catch y'all in the next one. Peace.